Always a pleasure to head out to Utah. Love the lid as well, Cole. Thank you for giving us some time here in the middle of July. And it's been a pretty busy offseason for you and everyone else covering the Mammoth. Last year there was a 7 point gap between them and the final playoff spot. Did Bill Armstrong do enough this summer to convince you that they can make up that gap, or is there still more work to do for him?
Yeah, I think, when you look at it on paper, this is a team that should definitely make the playoffs. Not that, I'm not saying, oh, for sure, book it now. The Mammoth are going to be, in the postseason next spring. But I think, when you look at the additions that Bill Armstrong was able to make during this offseason, it was all about, taking their big swing with Peterka and then adding depth and experience in free agency, with bringing in guys like Tanev and Schmidt, Vanacek, and Perunovic. They really just needed to kind of bolster themselves across the board. And I think that's what he was really able to do. Now, I know that a lot of fans were going, well, they didn't take the big swing that we were expecting them to. Well, they did. It just didn't come in the way that a lot of people had reported, right? They didn't get to enter the Marner or the Bennett sweepstakes, but what they did was add another young scorer in Peterka to help bolster that top six. And what I like about that addition is it sticks to the timeline, right? It doesn't, tie them up. It doesn't, bring in some guy that's way ahead of, guys like Cooley and Gunther and even Keller and Sergachev based on their age. But it sticks to that young core that can be successful maybe 4 or 5 years down the road.
Cole, is it crazy to say that even though this team didn't make the playoffs in their first year, that it was still a success? Like, what would that look like this coming season, right? Like, if they still have that winning record and you feel good about them, but they missed the playoffs, would you be able to call year two a success if that is the case?
I think that one's tough because, the inaugural season, I think, was all about introducing hockey to the state of Utah, putting on a full 82 game schedule and, really allowing the community to embrace the NHL. So whatever happened on the ice was a success no matter what, right? Like we learned that hockey works in Utah, whereas in year two, okay, we're getting serious now. Like we're in that, Utah's in the National Hockey League, and this team, it doesn't matter who you ask, whether it's the front office, whether it's players, whether it's staff, management, everyone is saying, look, we're taking that step out of the rebuild and we want to make the playoffs. We expect to make the playoffs. And so, I think if Utah doesn't make the postseason, not that it would be a huge or wild disappointment, but I would definitely look at it and say, yeah, they did not live up to expectations if they are not playing games, after the regular season this next year.
And I want to ask you also, since you've been able to watch him up close, and we talked about him a little bit yesterday, so it's good to see you again 2 days in a row. But
yeah,
Clayton Keller, where he stands right now, as far as like the respect given to him throughout the National Hockey League, because he's left off Team USA and Four Nations, you got to think he'll make it this year for the Olympic team. He puts up 90 points last year, 30 goals, 60 assists. He's got 3 straight 30-plus goal seasons. Like, is he not one of the best players in the NHL that isn't talked about nearly enough? Like, where can we put Keller as far as this, like, most underrated guy in the league conversation goes?
I think he's right up there. There was a post on X last week. I can't remember exactly what account. It may have been Flow Hockey or maybe Sleeper NHL. One of those that said, it had this like bar where it was like talent way up here and respect in the league was way down here. And I quoted that and I put that I think it's Clayton Keller. Not just because he's here in Utah and he plays for the team that I cover, but I genuinely think like you look at a guy that had 90 points this last season, who helped lead the United States to a gold medal for the first time in almost 100 years at World Championships. He's the youngest captain in the league, and it just feels like nobody's ever really talking about him. He's doing all these incredible things, and I think he is one of the most underrated players in the National Hockey League. And he downplayed the fact that he was left off Four Nations. Anytime you'd ask him about it, he'd say, it doesn't really matter to me. I think he took it personally. Because he exploded from that point, with an unbelievable performance throughout the rest of the season. And every time he played the Minnesota Wild, they were generally beating the Wild, and Keller was at the forefront of that. I think he averaged like 2.5 or 3 points every time they played Minnesota after that. So he was letting Bill Guerin know, hey, you made a mistake leaving me off the roster. And I do expect him to make the Olympic roster after the season he had and what he did at the World Championships. He would be a massive snub if he is left off.
I wanted to wrap up a little bit by asking you about the blue line. And I mean, I'm looking at their roster right now, and the 7 guys all making $2+ million that they have on payroll, all legitimate veterans who could make a case to be in the lineup every day. But there's also this kind of undercurrent of young blue liners coming up through their system as well. Simashev, Lamoureux. I mean, you mentioned they signed Scott Perunovich, who's still only 26. Is there a world where one of those 3 guys who aren't a member of that current 7 actually earn a job at a camp and force the Mammoth to make some tough decisions as early as this fall? Or do you think they're pretty set on letting the young guys go and develop a little bit in the AHL and just waiting to make that decision?
It'll be interesting to see what happens with Simashev. And who we didn't even mention is D. Simone, right? Like, they've got 10 skaters that could easily snag, roster spots. I would look more towards that third line. I don't think anybody's going to beat out, those top 2 defensive lines. But looking at that third with Schmidt and Ian Cole, that's how I anticipate the season to begin. But a name to definitely keep an eye on is Simashev. He had an unreal development camp. He looked ready to go. He was, head and shoulders above everybody else, all the other prospects. And Bill Armstrong has said that both he and Daniil Boot are anticipated to get minutes this season. Now, how does that look? I think training camp, will be a huge factor in determining, is Simashev playing day one? Does he maybe sneak up and steal one of those spots, or do they run with 7 defensemen early on? Or is he just kind of a consistent scratch? Now, if you look at him and Boot, and I know that we're more so talking defensive, but I expect Boot to need some time in the AHL. I'm not overly concerned about Simashev's game. He just, like I said, his skating is elite. The way that he was able to push the puck, to orchestrate breakouts, the way he attacked the offensive zone, I'm convinced that he's pretty darn close to being ready. I anticipate he'll see minutes, but as you guys have on your website with that roster, that's how I anticipate the season to start. But let's see what Simashev does. As for Lamoureux, I think he's going to spend the entire season in the AHL. He did fine, for Utah last season, but he didn't necessarily thrive when he went back to the A. So, give him a full season. Let's see what he can do. And when some of those contracts come off the books a year from now, when Ian Cole's done and whatnot, maybe that's an opportunity for Lamoureux to kind of take a step next season.
10 potential NHL caliber defensemen. There are a lot of GMs around the league who are like, I can't find 6 of them. What is going on? But Cole, enjoy the rest of your summer. Appreciate you popping on.
Thanks
guys.
Cole.